Hello everyone, it is Sunday, October 10th, and this is episode 34 of Odds Are, your S&P 500 weekly market forecast. All right, so what happened last week? If you remember from last week's episode, I said do not be surprised if we do not have a breach of the breach points this week. So even though it's normally above an 80% chance that we will have a breach of one of those 2 points, this week, because we had that weird dynamic where the breach point was actually above the upper settlement limit and then also above the lower settlement limit. We had those two kind of offset. It just looked weird. Something didn't feel right. The gap was really wide as well, and it also felt like we were kind of like stalling. I didn't think we were going to continue in that free fall. So I said, don't be surprised, and that's exactly what happened. So we did close within the expected settlement range, but we did not have a breach of the breach points. We also didn't even come close to the parabolic SAR up at 45.48, but that's no surprise. But for those of you who've been watching the show, you know that the fact that we didn't have a breach of the breach points this week means something very special for next week, which we'll cover here shortly. But first, let's look at the moving averages. Here's another weird thing, right? We've been trapped in this short-term bearish, medium-term bullish mode for about 3 weeks now, because the market keeps going down, but then it bounces up, it goes down a little bit, goes up, and it's not enough to flip the medium term into a neutral state. It's also not rebounding high enough to flip the short term back into a neutral state. So we're kind of in this limbo. Eventually, one of the two is going to give, right? Unless the market completely trades sideways for the next, 4 or 5 weeks, which, I mean, who knows? I guess it could happen, but I'm looking at which way is this going to break. To the downside, back up. So is the bearish short term going to flip to neutral, or is the medium term going to flip to neutral in the opposite direction? All right, so let's look at what we're expecting for next week. We have I'm gonna start actually with the expected settlement range first, right? So we're expecting to settle between 42.60 and 44.57. That's a 79.27% chance of happening. But now let's look at the breach points, right? So 42.92 and 44.46. Those are the two breach points with a 97.97% chance that we will breach one of those two levels, because last week we did not have a breach. So this week, the chances are way higher that we will have a breach of those two. And we're going to look to see if we can get a little bit of insight onto which one it's going to breach, right? So the numbers are not looking at one direction or the other, right? There's no directional bias. But I think we can actually get a little bit deeper into this on one of the next slides. All right, so looking at this chart, you see where the breach points are. You see where the market closed. That's that blue line. 97.97% chance of closing or breaching one of those 2 points. So which one is it going to breach? And this is what I believe. I'm looking at this chart and I'm saying, hey, we've now flipped to a bearish mode because the parabolic SAR was finally, we closed below it, and now we flipped. And if you look at everything before, so let's go back like 2 or 3 weeks before that, and you see that the market was kind of in this channel that was always above the red midline and within the Bollinger Band, range or that envelope, and it kept kind of trading within that state, and it would poke below it, it would breach, hit the bottom end of the Bollinger Band, spike back up, and then get back into that upward trading channel. Now things have changed, and we see that it looks like we're actually staying on below the midline. And what happens is the midline is now not acting as support, it's acting as resistance. And so we're going up to the midline and then coming back down, and up to the midline and coming back down. But every time we hit the midline, you see that we're at lower and lower points. So that, to me, is also evidence and support of the fact that we are now in that bearish mode. And I'm thinking that if we're at the midline, so if we have another test of that, which is where we're at, and if it's rejected, that midline is going to send the market going back down, which in that case means that 42.92 is the breach point to watch. So I don't know, maybe it's time to buy a put, right? But what do I know? Let's take a look at, didn't see that one coming. So one of the things that we were preparing for last week was the fact that after the breach of the parabolic SAR, or closing below it, that the average downward move was way more way more significant, right? Way more negative than the average on any other given week. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always going to happen, but it was something to watch out for. So that did not happen. We actually closed 0.7% higher, so not a lot. I mean, 30 points. And, we're still in that bearish mindset, but now I'm looking at the parabolic SAR, and like we said, we're looking at that red midline. So looking forward, this is what I'm thinking. You need to pay attention to that Bollinger Band more, because as we're flipping now and it looks like we're in that lower channel, it's very visual. It's easy to see. So, there's obviously a lot of statistics and information that goes into these systems that I work with, but just looking at the chart, I mean, that's something that you can't say you didn't see it coming, because like you could just see it on any chart. All you got to do is plot the Bollinger Band and you'll see the midline just in its default, mode, and you can see exactly what I'm seeing. So you can't say you didn't see it coming. Hopefully, you guys are sharing this or taking this into account when you're planning your trades for the next week. But I've done my best to share it. I guess that's all I can do, right? All right, and we're going to wrap up with the quote of the week, which is by Mr. Sami Abu-Saad. And he's a professional trader who has been, featured in a couple different articles and interviews that I've caught him on. And he says, "Are you willing to lose money on a trade? If not, then don't take it. You can only win if you're not afraid to lose, and you can only do that if you truly accept the risk that's in front of you." I remember I had a mentor that once told me that when he makes a trade, he pretends that he's writing a check and he's mailing that check out. So he is parting with that money. He just knows that that money very well may not come back. It may come back only partially. It may come back with interest, or he may lose it completely. So he writes that check at the moment he executes the trade. And so I think that's what this quote is speaking to, is the fact that you have to understand that you're going to take losses, and if you're not okay with taking them, you're going to trade scared. And I know what that feels like. I've been there. I've made mistakes. I've taken profit way too early because I was afraid of losing it. And what happens is that throws all of your odds like completely out of whack. So if you have a system that you make steady profits, but every once in a while you're going to have a big loss, like it only makes sense if all your profits add up to more than that one big loss. But what happens if all your profits, you're shortchanging yourself and you're taking smaller and smaller profits because you're afraid of losing it? Then the numbers change and your profits will not be enough to offset your losses, and you'll end up just losing money progressively. So just be ready to lose, but also make sure that you're ready to win, right? And that sounds weird. You don't really have to feel like you have to be told that, but yes, also be ready to win. So when you're taking your trades, follow your plan. Last week's episode we talked about trading your plan. I think this is a part of it, right? Understanding that you can't be afraid to lose, but you also have to be ready to win. And so on that note, I'll leave you guys. Enjoy your week, and we'll be back here next week. Bye.